Yes, Russia being sanctioned can't import cars from Europe and Japan. It has indeed become the market with the most Chinese-branded cars. In the first half of 2023, products from Chinese-funded automakers reached sales of 168 units in the Russian market, accounting for 49% of Russia's market share. Of the top 10 in new car sales, 6 spots are occupied by these brands. But here's a little scoop. 80% of these vehicles aren't even manufactured in China. They're produced in countries that are part of the Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU. That means these cars are assembled in Russia, Belarus, or Kazakhstan. To be more specific, Chery, which is the second most popular brand, assembles its cars in Belarus. Great Wall's Haval is produced in Russia. Only Geely imports all its cars to the Russian market directly from China. These three Chinese car brands have been heavily influenced by technological developments from Europe, America, Japan, and South Korea. Their technological foundation is by no means weak. However, with their growing sales in Russia, complaints about these brands have also increased by 35%. According to a survey by local Russian institutions, 44% of Russian consumers believe that the metal materials used in Chinese cars are too thin or the components are not suitable. 42% pointed out metal corrosion issues, believing that these cars are not adapted to Russia's cold winters. 29% felt that the electronic products and components used in Chinese cars are of lower quality. 28% complained that the suspension is too soft for Russian roads. Furthermore, 24% of consumers believe that the paint coating on Chinese cars is not robust. The core issue lies in the choice of materials and the difference in manufacturing standards. In China, influenced by constantly upgrading emission standards, many cars meet the scrapping criteria in just 5 to 6 years. Thus, Chinese automakers might not prioritize long-term durability during design. Coupled with China's relatively mild climate compared to Russia, there may not have been significant emphasis on cold resistance and specialized material treatment. When such vehicles are introduced to Russia's frigid environment, they may face issues in a short time, highlighting the characteristic, quote, Tofu-Dreg engineering of Chinese manufacturing. In Russia, Chinese cars are often called, quote, tin cans for their flimsy body and uncomfortable rattling interiors. They're also known as, quote, coffins on wheels for their low safety standards. Alexander Smolin, who lives in Yekaterinburg, said, quote, I'd rather buy an old Mercedes than a new Chinese car whose name I can't even pronounce. I will never switch to a Chinese car. Ilya Korbutyak, a car owner from Moscow, talked about his disappointment after recently driving a brand new Chery Tiggo 7 crossover. Quote, imagine you're in the front passenger seat and you're feeling air on your legs, even though the ventilator is turned off, he said. He attributed the problem to a silly defect, a loose rubber seal. Quote, that means dust and exhaust fumes in the passenger compartment, and in winter you had better get into this car dressed in warm shoes and clothing. Regardless, it's quite unpleasant, he said. Quote, I'm convinced that many who buy Chinese models are 100% guaranteed to face various unpleasant surprises. A taxi driver from Russia remarked that, post the Russia-Ukraine conflict, he had driven several Chinese cars. In his opinion, when compared to the Škoda he purchased in 2022, these Chinese cars noticeably lacked driving stability. This is a sentiment widely shared. In the Russian taxi industry, most drivers prefer brands like Hyundai, Kia, and particularly Renault's Logan. Especially the Renault Logan, an original French model. Many of these vehicles can run up to 500,000 kilometers without major repairs, making it a favorite among Russians. According to Russian automotive experts, Chinese cars perform decently on smooth asphalt roads. However, considering Russia's vast terrain, vehicles often have to navigate muddy roads. Coupled with Russians' penchant for aggressive driving, the chassis and suspension systems of Chinese cars seem inadequate in bumpy conditions. Prominent figures in Russia's automotive world also pointed out that many Chinese cars rely heavily on touchscreen interfaces. During actual driving, compared to traditional physical buttons, touchscreens can easily distract the driver. Additionally, for Russian car owners, the seating design in many Chinese cars seems undersized. Some Chinese car engines and transmission systems also do not perform up to their advertised specifications. Russian consumers choosing to buy Chinese models might face challenges regarding vehicle value retention in the upcoming years, largely because the maintenance and parts supply chain for some Chinese cars in Russia is not yet well established. The rusting issue of Chinese cars in Russia's chilly environment has garnered widespread consumer attention. A survey by Odkrite Auto showed that over half of Russian drivers think Chinese cars are only partly suited to the harsh local climate. This reflects not only a product issue but also suggests short-sighted strategies by some Chinese automakers. Considering cities in Russia see snowfall on over 110 days annually, cars are constantly exposed to melting salt. The resulting chloride ions can seriously corrode a car's chassis and metal components. However, it seems some Chinese automakers haven't adequately considered this in their designs. One might wonder, what are Chinese automaker executives thinking? You know, the cars we sell domestically rust too. Why don't I see auto reviewers complaining about that? Cars are made of iron, so rust is natural. Plus, in the Russian market right now, we're the dominant player. There's hardly any competition. Do the Russians even have any other choice? Not really, so I'm not worried. Our sales won't be affected. As for those car reviewers, let them talk. The Russian market has very limited competition right now. The conflict in Ukraine has left many Russians strapped for cash, so there's a ceiling to the market growth. We don't need to invest too much energy. And the reason these Russian reviewers are saying all this, it's probably because they didn't get any perks from us. But if we did give in, it's like opening a Pandora's box. So their complaints, just a blatant shakedown. While the harsh conditions in China's northeast are somewhat milder than in Russia, to make Chinese cars function properly in Russia, specific product modifications like improved insulation materials and enhanced heater power are necessary. However, such adjustments elevate costs which Russian distributors might resist. Therefore, Chinese cars in Russia remain largely unimproved, inevitably leading to local user complaints. But why haven't there been complaints about Japanese and German cars after their many years in Russia? Brands from the Western world emphasize integrity, product quality, and reputation. They not only customize their products but also have a complete supply chain for cold-resistant parts. In contrast, Chinese automakers' argument is that as Western automakers withdrew, they weren't prepared for the suddenly vacated Russian market, hence their excuse for the quality issues. Entering the 21st century, the Russian government encouraged Western car manufacturers to establish local plants, offering various subsidies to incentivize them to produce parts in Russia. By 2021, Russia's domestic car production reached about 1.4 million units, roughly half of the market. At that time, Chinese car brands only held about 10% market share, but last year, as Western and Asian automakers exited Russia, Chinese brands like Haval, Chery, and Geely began to dominate, currently making up nearly 40% of Russia's new car sales. The concern, however, is the perceived subpar quality of Chinese cars despite their high prices. A Russian auto critic stated, setting aside the quality of Chinese cars, their prices alone are too steep.
Oh, and look over there. This is a Chery Tiggo 7 Pro. It sells for 140,000 yuan in China, but do you know how much it sells for here in Russia? Between 4 million and 4.65 million rubles, which is roughly equivalent to 320,000 yuan. And this isn't even an isolated case. Even Chinese cars assembled within Russia or the EAEU are priced significantly higher.
Sergei Klimov, a board member of the Dolavta Group, emphasized that the primary reason for this price disparity lies in the greed between Chinese manufacturers and Russian customs. Yet Russians seem to have no choice. Even previously cheap domestically produced models are slowly rising in price, following the example of Chinese cars. Following the complete equity transfer of Renault's Moscow plant to the Moscow government, they began using the production line of Chinese automaker JAC to mass-produce Moskvich-free cars, which are by no means budget-friendly. Automotive analyst Sergei Tsiganov, writing on the Telegram channel, quote, Russian Automobile, commented on the Moskvich-free vehicle when comparing it to the European counterparts. After test driving the new model, he exclaimed, quote, "Are you kidding me?" He said the interior, quote, "smells like China, the steering wheel angle is not adjustable, and acceleration is weak." The blogger noted that he did not experience the, quote, "feel of the car" and criticized its handling and stability, which in his opinion are practically non-existent. In contrast with its European counterparts, the Moskvich-free, quote, "looks like a misunderstanding." He wrote, quote, "very noisy, very. The blame all goes to the thin glass, which external noise penetrates like it's going straight into your brain." He said, quote, "I have no idea how Moskvich plans to sell tens of thousands of these junky cars." Over the past 2 decades, Russia has strongly pushed for the localization of its automotive industry and strategies to replace imports. By 2021, the proportion of imported cars had decreased 4-fold compared to a decade ago. Large automotive industry clusters have begun to take shape in the Volga, northwestern, and central regions. Western companies such as Mercedes and BMW have provided substantial support in technology and equipment, including key technologies in stamping, welding, and casting. During this period, Western automakers played a crucial role in Russia's automotive sector, helping establish a comprehensive production supply chain. However, following their exit last year, Chinese car companies entered the Russian car manufacturing industry with a business strategy differing from their Western counterparts. Chinese automakers tend to set up car assembly lines in Russia rather than comprehensive investment and construction. They primarily rent factories left behind by Western companies for assembly, importing many core components from China. Essential stages like stamping, welding, and casting are also completed in China. This approach disrupts the full cycle of the Russian automotive production chain. To establish a supply chain in Russia equivalent to Western automakers, years of effort are required, and the quality might still fall short. Due to sanctions, Russia's automobile industry has regressed significantly. Essential items like airbags have to be imported from India. Faced with a lack of safety airbags and ABS systems, Russia amended its laws, allowing manufacturers to produce cars without these features, even forgoing seatbelts. Because of the lack of key electronic control units, KAMAZ has reverted to producing Euro 2 emission standard vehicles from the 1970s. At the same time, Auto VAZ started manufacturing cars without automatic transmissions. Even with China's support, these sanctions still push Russian automotive technology backwards. Even in the car assembly phase, Chinese companies struggle to match the efficiency of Western companies that once operated in Russia. For instance, at the former Renault plant in Moscow, it now takes 2 months to assemble 86 Moskvich cars. Under Renault's management, the same number could be produced in just 3 hours. Russia's shift to Chinese production lines affects not only production processes, vehicle platforms, and technology, but may also disrupt past collaborations with Western automakers. If these remaining Western factories become fully, quote, Sinicized, even if Russia-West relations improve, Western companies might hesitate to re-enter. This shift towards the East indicates a decline in Russia's automotive production and technological capability, loss of core technology and knowledge, and the diminishing possibility of integration with the global automotive industry. As for Chinese electric cars, they find no market in Russia. The cold weather, coupled with a high dependency on oil tax revenue, makes Russia indifferent to promoting electric vehicles. With cheap gasoline, combustion engine vehicles remain dominant. Not a single electric vehicle is found among the top 20 car sales in the Russian market.